Well, hello everybody at St Chad's Primary School, Key Stage 2. It is wonderful to be with you today. I'm joining you today all the way from my house and I'm in my study room, and it is lovely to be with you in this way. So, there's a certain way that we say hello to one another in the church, and I wonder if you guys can remember. So if I say, "The Lord be with you," hopefully the answer that you gave me then was also with you. So let's try one more time. The Lord be with you, and also with you. Excellent. Well done, guys. That's brilliant. Now, today, what I'd like to talk to you about is the future, and how, as Christians, we can trust that God will be with us both now and also in the future. And even though we might be able to guess what might happen tomorrow or next week or even in a year's time, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, do we? Sometimes we're just making an educated guess. But I've got a few questions for you, and I'd like you to pause it in a second and answer these questions together. And they're really important questions, okay? So my first one is this. Which football team will be the next team to win the Premier League? So have a pause now and answer that question together. Excellent, well done. And my next question, it's just as important, it's this, okay? Which pop singer or band or music group is going to be the next to get to number 1 in the charts? So who's going to be the next number 1? Have a pause and discuss that one. Fantastic. Well, I'll be really interested to hear what you guys have said about that. I'm looking forward to hearing your answers. Now, we can probably guess, can't we? I mean, some teams in the Premier League are much better than others, and some pop singers are much better than others, but we don't always know exactly what's going to happen. Remember when Leicester won the Premier League? No one expected that. And what I have with me is a deck of cards. Now, put your hand up if you like card games. I do. I love card games. And if you ask any adult here at school or when you get home, if they remember a TV show called Play Your Cards Right, I'm sure that they'll be able to tell you lots of good stuff about it. And it goes a bit like this, okay? So, the card that I'm holding up now is a number 3. So if you think that the next card that I pull from the deck is higher than 3, what I would like you to do is to stand up. But if you think the card I pick up next is lower than 3, what I'd like you to do is sit down. So let's play together, Play Your Cards Right. Brilliant. So are you all ready? Okay, everybody sat down at the moment. The first card that I am pulling from the deck is a number 7. So do you think the card I'm pulling up next will be higher or lower? So stand up if you think it's higher and remain seated if you think it's lower. Give you a couple of seconds to move. Our next card is a number 3, so well done if you sat down for that one. You won. So everybody sit down again. Let's play once more. So we've got a number 3, okay? So do you think the next card I'm picking up will be higher than 3 or lower than 3? So stand up if you think it's higher. Give you a couple more seconds to move. And our next card is a number 4, so well done again if you stood up for that one. Excellent work. So everybody sit down. Let's play one more time. So remember, we've got a number 4. So if you think the next card is going to be higher than 4, I'd like you to stand up. But if you think it's going to be lower than 4, I'd like you to stay sat down. Are you ready? Higher or lower? Our next card is, it's a number 2. So well done if you remained seated for that one. Excellent work. And maybe that's a game you can play later on today or when you get home. So everybody sit down again. Now, what I'd like us to do now is to talk about a story, and it's from the Bible. It's from the book of Genesis, and it's about 2 people who you may have heard of before, and they're called Abraham and Sarah. And at some point in their life, when they were really old, they had to trust God about their future. because he said that some very odd things were going to happen. Because even though they were very old, he told them that they were going to have children, and he also wanted them to move to a brand new land with brand new surroundings and brand new neighbours, and to trust him that everything was going to be okay. So let's watch this video together.
God's story, God's promise to Abraham. So part of God's story is about a promise God made to Abraham, and it begins like this. Once there was a guy named Abraham. He had a wife, Sarah. They didn't think they could have any kids, which was a major disappointment because they really wanted a family. But little did Abraham know that God had a very special plan for him. When Abraham was 75 years old, God promised to give him kids, and one day God would send the rescuer through his family. All God asked was that Abraham and Sarah leave their home first and follow him. Now, they had a tough choice to make: leave all their friends and trust God, or stay comfortable. This was not easy. See, Abraham really wanted kids, but was already pretty old. Sarah was getting up there too. So if Abraham and Sarah were going to leave their home and trust in God's promise, they had to believe that God would do something that seemed impossible. The good news is, they decided to trust that God would keep his promise. That's always the right choice. So Abraham and Sarah moved from their home to a land called Canaan. Right away, God reminded Abraham of his promise. He said, "I will make your children like the dust of the earth." Can specks of dust be counted? If they can, then your children can be counted. This was God's funny way of telling Abraham he would have a lot of kids, because nobody can count every piece of dust. Well, this promise seemed great, but after a while, Abraham and Sarah still had no kids, let alone as many as the pieces of dust. Now, they were really old. Sometimes God doesn't remind us of his promises because he wants us to learn to trust him. But God took Abraham outside at night and told him to look at the stars. He reminded Abraham that he would give him that many kids. So Abraham decided to keep believing God. He and Sarah waited again. After more years, he got impatient. This time, God told Abraham, by next year, Sarah will have a son. But by now, Abraham was 99 years old. He and Sarah had both given up on having kids and God's promise. In fact, when Abraham told Sarah what God said, she laughed. It's probably not a good idea to laugh at God's promises, but Sarah was tired of waiting and had stopped trusting. The great thing is, even if we think it's impossible, God really does keep his promises. And just like God promised, Sarah got pregnant the next year after Abraham's 100th birthday. When her son was born, she named him Isaac, which means laughter. Sarah said, "God has given laughter to me. Everybody who hears about this will laugh with me." God kept his promise to give Abraham and Sarah a son. Even though they didn't think it was possible, it was easy for God because he can do anything. And remember how God was going to give Abraham as many children as the stars in the sky? Well, Isaac grew up and had children who had more children who had more children. This kept going and going and going. And guess who eventually was born in Abraham's line? The rescuer himself, God's son, Jesus. All because Abraham followed God and trusted God to keep his promise. And that's the story of God's promise to Abraham.
Fantastic. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that video. That's a brilliant story, isn't it? And if you'd like to know more about it, remember it's in the book of Genesis, and you can read that later on about what happened next. Now, these are some questions that I'd like you to think about for the rest of the day. You don't have to answer them now. But how do you think Abraham and Sarah must have felt when God told them that they were going to have children after waiting for so long? How do you think they must have felt? How also do you think they felt when they had to wait even longer to have children? And also, how do you think they felt when God asked them to move to a brand new land, the land of Canaan, where they didn't know anyone and everything looked different? How do you think they felt then? I'm guessing that you're probably thinking that they felt maybe scared, maybe a bit anxious and worried, but maybe also excited and joyful about what might happen next. But the point of that story is that they didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but they trusted God. And that God, like he does with all of us because he loves us and cares for us, whatever happens, God is going to be with us, and that everything is going to be okay because he cares for us. And that's what we can rejoice in as Christians, that God will always be with us no matter what, and that everything will be fine. So maybe let's say a prayer together. So perhaps just put your hands together like this and bow your heads and let's say this prayer. So, dear God, thank you that you love us and care about us. Thank you that although we can't predict the future, we can know that you will always be with us, whatever we do and wherever we go. Please help us to trust you. And please help us to find other people who we can trust and talk to about our fears. Amen. Now we're going to say a prayer together that I'm sure you all know very well, and it's called the Lord's Prayer. So let's say this together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen. Well, it has been amazing to be with you all this morning. I've really enjoyed it. Reverend Chris and I, we're really looking forward to coming back into school soon. But have a really good day, and remember that whatever happens in the future, we can trust God because He's going to be with us. So we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.